So imagine a beautiful teenage girl standing in front of her mirror saying over and over, "I hate you. I hate you. I hate you." I mean, it's just tragic to imagine, but sadly, I'm guessing that some of you can relate. Statistics show that the average age of onset for mental illness is 14 years old. 60 million Americans today live with some form of diagnosed mental illness, and 40,000 Americans end their life by suicide every year. So the question is, today, does Jesus heal things like depression and bipolar and suicide ideation? Well, my next guest wants you to hear her story, so stay tuned. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the R3 podcast, Rescue, Rebuild, Restore. This is from Encounter Online and Operation Restored Warrior. And I'm Shane, and I'm here with Sarah Daley. Sarah is a drop zone facilitator for Operation Restored Warrior. Of course, she went through her own drop zone. She is a Marine and an artist and all sorts of other things that we're going to talk about today. Sarah, welcome back to the podcast. So glad you're here.
Thank you for having me, Shane.
Oh, of course. Well, I'm excited because I've heard a little bit about your story. You shared a little bit with us when you were here with Kim a couple of weeks ago, but I'm interested in hearing more. I love sharing true stories because it shows what Jesus can do. If Jesus can do it for you, then somebody out there listening will realize the truth. Jesus can do it for them too. So I'm going to try to talk as little as possible and just get out of your way. I want to turn it over to you, and I want to hear the Sarah story. What is the story of your life, and in particular, how you took some hits along the way, just like everybody does, and how those got repaired? Anyway, start where you think you should start. It's all yours.
Well, it kind of goes a little bit, kind of a ways back. It all started in 1977.
Good year Star Wars came out.
Yeah. I was born in Hibbing, Minnesota. Very northern, very, very cold place. My mom and dad got divorced when I was about 1. And so my older sister, she's about a year older than I am. And my mom and we kind of just did the whole, living in the single parent home lifestyle for many years, all the way up until my sister and I were teenagers. So what that looked like was, there was some hits and bumps along the way growing up in a single parent household. There was a lot of poverty. My mom herself was struggling with a lot of traumatic things that she had been through. There was, within our whole family sphere, there was a history of some alcohol abuse and drug abuse. And that just kind of goes way back in my family line, in my family lineage. And my father, I was able to spend some time with him as a child, spending summers and Christmas vacations and things like that. But things weren't perfect. Overall, it was a pretty happy childhood, because I think that Jesus somehow gave the grace to be able, so that I could cope with it. One of those ways was art. Every time things would get rough in the house, mom was mad at me, mom was not doing so well, we would kind of feel that. And my way of leaving that would be to escape into my art, into my own little creative world of art and play. And I was very fortunate to be able to go outside and play a lot. Even though we were very poor, there was a big amount of land behind the apartment building that we lived in. So I was able to go and explore and be a tomboy as well as an artist. So that was a lot of fun. I grew up fighting with my mom a lot. There was a lot of tension there. I really believed that I could do things better than her. I thought that I could lead the family better than her. I don't know why I was thinking that, but there was just a lot of tension there. A lot of bumping heads. My mom and I are a lot alike. But so there was a lot of arguing and yelling going on. And then around the age of 15, my mom got remarried. She picked herself up by the bootstraps. She really did. She got a job. She bought a house. She did that all on her own. And after that time frame, then she got married. And he was a great guy and everything, but tensions were starting to rise with my mother and I. I was not a bad kid at this time. I didn't go out drinking. I wasn't having sex with boys. I wasn't doing any of those things. But around the age of 16 is when things got really bad in the house. And my mom got into such a bad argument that I was like, I want to go live with my dad. And she's like, fine, go ahead. And there was words said on both sides that should never be said. So I did end up going to live with my father, and he lived in the southern part of Minnesota. So it was quite a ways away. And that was in 10th grade. So I had to leave everything behind, mostly because of my own pride. I have to admit that. My little baby brother, my little baby sister that was on the way, because my mom had more kids when she got married. And my older sister, it was just a big family shock. And going to live with my dad, I felt very lonely because we didn't really have such a close relationship because we didn't spend a lot of time in my life together. Like I said, holidays
Yeah.
and summer and some summers. And, even though it was kind of a gift to be able to spend that time with my dad, he was working a lot. And I was struggling. My mental health was struggling because I left everything behind, all my friends and everyone and my family. And I just felt very, very alone. I suddenly had nobody. And my mom and I weren't talking. My sister and I weren't talking. It was like I felt completely cut off and abandoned. And I spent about 6 months living with my father. And during that time, I got very suicidal. And I just wanted to end it. And I was serious. I would look at myself in the mirror and I would just sit there and say over and over and over again, I hate you. I hate you. I hate you. Um, wow, I haven't thought about that for a while, but
Mm,
um,
that's just
so
powerful stuff.
yeah, and it was very hard. My father didn't know how to deal with it, and clearly I didn't. So I ended up going to live with my grandmother. And so then I would be going to another school. So it was 3 schools at the age of 16. And at that school, I finally felt some hope because I was making friends easily. And my grandmother let me do whatever I wanted to. And at the time, that's what I thought that I needed. And I can honestly say that it's definitely not what I needed. What I needed was discipline and routines and something that would ground me a little bit more, keep me grounded. So I spent the next couple years of high school pretty much doing what I wanted. I got to do some sports and stuff like that and made some great friends. I didn't get into too much trouble at first, but then I started going out to the parties. I started drinking. I started meeting boys. I started smoking some pot, doing things that I really had no business doing. But my grandma let me do it. She didn't know about it. I just kind of was like free reign. Well, one night I got really, really drunk. And up to this point, I was 17, I was almost 18. I was pretty proud of myself that I was able to maintain my virginity up to that point. And I'm just going to be open about it because it's part of my story. And it was my intention to save myself for marriage. I did not grow up in church or anything. I was not religious, but I did believe in God and I did pray to God frequently whenever I had
Mm,
whenever I had problems. I didn't know that I could talk to him and praise him and spend time with him when I wasn't sad. I didn't really understand that relationship yet. Um, but yeah, I had no church family, no faith, no following Jesus really in my life other than the occasional prayer. But I did have a conviction inside of me that I didn't I didn't want to throw my body around like that. And I didn't judge anyone who did that. It was just a personal choice for me at the time. But I did get really drunk at a party, and I don't remember losing my virginity. I don't remember any of it, but I do know that I woke up in the morning and I knew what had happened. And so I spent the rest of my high school time being somewhat indiscriminate about having sex with boys because I was like, well, that's gone. So what's the point now? Nobody's going to love me, unless I do what they want me to do, basically. There were a lot of messages there. And prior to me accidentally, I don't know, it wasn't my intention to lose my virginity. But prior to that happening, I did have a boyfriend, and he broke up with me because I wouldn't have sex with him. And that was very painful because he was my first love. And so I already had these wounds in my, forming in my head and in my heart. And once I went to that party and that happened, then I was like, well, that's that then. And so I briefly dated a few boys who used me. And then from that point, I was pretty much plummeting. I was doing terrible in school. I wasn't showing up half the time. The only thing that saved me in high school was, well, there were a couple things. I could take tests. I never did homework, but I could take tests. And I had a lot of detention to make up. I was getting in fights in school.
Mm.
I was literally getting in fist fights. Or trying to get in fist fights. If I wasn't getting in a fist fight, I was trying to get in a fist fight. I wanted to fight.
Wow.
And it's very interesting because I was also voted most artistic in my high school. So I don't know what that's all about. But I've always had like a warrior kind of spirit deep inside me. I used to watch American Gladiators. That used to be a big thing. I'd be like, man, I want to be just like those women American gladiators. They're awesome. And then there was also the side of me that wanted to be exactly like Bob Ross. So, painting happy trees and all the fun stuff. I've just always been a walking contradiction in a way. But I ended up getting contacted by a few recruiters in the area, and the Army and the Navy and the Air Force, they gave me a pretty good pitch. They said it's pretty easy. I don't have to do too much shooting. I might get to shoot a pistol. It wouldn't be too big of a deal, but I'd have to cut my hair. And at the time, I had really long hair, and I was very vain about it. And the Marine recruiter said, you get to keep your long hair and you get to shoot pretty much any weapon you want. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool, because I'd never shot a firearm up until that point. And I don't know, I just liked the warrior aspect of what the Marine recruiter was offering. So I was like, I'm doing it. I'm going to do this. And
Wow.
it about broke my school librarian's heart because she wanted me so badly to go to art school. But I knew that I wasn't disciplined enough for it. With that little tiny scholarship, I was still going to have to pay a lot of money to go to the Art Institute of Minneapolis. That's a lot of money. And I didn't have it. And I didn't really have the drive to make that much money either. So I just knew intuitively that I needed something to help me get that base of discipline. And I believe that that's a God thing. That's totally a God moment that I didn't even realize it was God nudging me to go into the Marines. So I ended up going into the Marine Corps. I didn't think I would end up being good at it. I didn't have any shred of self-esteem at this point. I thought very lowly of myself, no confidence whatsoever. Even though I was very quick to start arguments with people and be combative with people. It was like a mask, tough girl mask that I was
Yeah.
putting on. But really inside, I was just a scared little girl. And so I went to boot camp, and the yelling and all of that, it honestly didn't bother me that much because I was kind of already used to that from my mother. I mean, she's just a tough lady. She didn't take any crap. And so I just was kind of immune to that. The only things that really um, were a challenge for me in boot camp was when my drill instructors were disappointed in me. I
Mm.
hated that. Or when other recruits were disappointed in me. That really stung. But I ended up doing really well. I ended up being number 3 in the whole platoon. So I was meritoriously promoted in boot camp. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. I get to eat 3 meals a day. I get to sleep a good amount, even though the drill instructors would come into the squad bay and wreak havoc on us every once in a while at night. But for the most part, we got around 6 or 7 hours of sleep. But yeah, uninterrupted sleep. And it was fun. I got to do things that I did in my childhood, like climb ropes and go through obstacle courses and get muddy and run and do all of the things and shoot. I loved the shooting. I couldn't believe how fun it was. And yeah, it did not disappoint. The boot camp experience did not disappoint whatsoever. So here I am in the Marine Corps, still taking a lot of my toxic behavior into the fleet, the drinking, the indiscriminate dating boys that, okay, now they're considered men at this point, dating men that really had a lot of toxic traits. And if they didn't have toxic traits, I would always try to do something to sabotage the
Mm.
relationship because it's like toxic just felt normal to me at that point. And again,
Wow.
inside, I did not have any self respect. But over time in the Marine Corps, I started to build more self respect and dignity because I would accomplish certain things that I didn't know that I could accomplish. I got promoted very quickly. I got promoted meritoriously to Lance Corporal, and then I moved on to Okinawa, and then got meritoriously promoted to corporal. And then from there, when I was getting ready to pick up sergeant, I decided to put in my package to be a drill instructor. So, and this is around
Put your
98.
experience yelling to good service.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But I was not intending on reenlisting, but my sergeant major at the time was, get this, in Okinawa, she was actually my senior drill instructor when I was in boot camp. And now she's my sergeant major. So it's just crazy how it all worked out because she's like, why don't you reenlist? Um, and I'm like, well, I guess I could, but I'm not going to reenlist unless I get to be a drill instructor because I thought that that would be the pinnacle. I would just go be a drill instructor, and then everything that I wanted to accomplish in the Marine Corps, it'd be a wrap. That would be good. And so I ended up actually getting into drill instructor school as a corporal. So, which you have to be a sergeant, but they had a waiver at the time because they didn't have very many female drill instructors. So they waived my rank, and then basically on my way to drill instructor school at Parris Island, South Carolina, I ended up getting promoted to sergeant. And so I was 22 years old, getting ready to be a drill instructor. Crazy. I was the youngest person in my drill instructor school class. Went through that whole process. It was very hard. It's one of the hardest schools in the Marine Corps. And I ended up graduating number 4 out of the entire class, which was a great accomplishment. I was very proud of that. And then I went in and I, started picking up cycles, started learning how to be a drill instructor, and things were going great. And then I got meritoriously promoted to staff sergeant. So now I'm suddenly a 24-year-old staff sergeant. So that was interesting. Steep learning curve. Very steep learning curve. I was still very immature in my heart, and with my defensiveness, there were a lot of things that I knew that were going to be challenges. So, but I ended up doing really well. And then all of a sudden, the unthinkable and the unexpected happened. I was 25 when this happened. I got pregnant while I was a working drill instructor. I was a senior drill instructor, actually. And during those days, it was very looked down on to be
Mm.
pregnant in the Marine Corps. This is the year 2001. And it was just so looked down on. And I was like, okay, I'm about to go from Golden Girl to just the biggest piece of crap.
Mm.
And literally that kind of happened. People considered me to be less than dirt. Um,
Wow.
because I didn't do what they told me to do. A lot of people gave me the advice to have an abortion. And I was threatened by my chain of command at the battalion level, not the company level. When I told my company level leadership, my first sergeant and my commanding officer, that I was pregnant, and I was so afraid to tell them that I was pregnant. You know, here I am, a grown woman, I'm a staff sergeant, I'm doing well, you know, and I'm just trembling inside to tell my leadership that I'm pregnant. So I go in and I tell my first sergeant first. And she says, congratulations, I need an operations chief here in the office anyways. And I'm like, really? You're not mad at me? And she's like, Sarah, I'm a single parent too. How do you think all that happened? And she's a first sergeant. She's just my hero.
Wow.
And I'm still in touch with her. And then I was like, okay, time to go and tell my commanding officer that I'm pregnant. I go in and I tell my captain, and she goes, she's like, Staff Sergeant, that's awesome. Babies are a blessing from God. And I'm like, are you kidding me? That's awesome. So
Wow.
I was so relieved. But then
Initially.
but then the battalion leadership came down and they were like, well, you've only done this many cycles on the drill field. So, and now you're pregnant. So we're going to go ahead and void you, meaning we're going to take away your MOS as a drill instructor, and we are going to give you an adverse fitness report. And basically, my career would have been ruined. As a staff sergeant, you get an adverse fitness report, you're done. You're not getting promoted after that, or it'll take a really long time for you to get promoted. And you know, not having any credit for any of the work and any of the achievements that I had done as a drill instructor, senior drill instructor, and senior drill instructor at receiving, like that would have been all wiped away. And
Wow.
so I'm like, I think I prayed at that point, and I'm like, this can't be. Like, how am I going to support my son if I'm just all of a sudden not able to reenlist because of adverse paperwork? How is this going to work? You know, I won't be able to provide for my son. And then, you know, it was very clearly indicated that by my battalion leadership that the thing that should be done was that I should terminate my pregnancy. That it was very clearly indicated, like, hey, you could always terminate it, you know, like as if that was an option. And I'm like, for me, that's not an option. That's not an option for me.
Yeah.
And
So you're just to put this in a little bit of context for our viewers. I always try to paint the picture of heart wounds because that's what's universal. A lot of people can't relate to several things in your story,
right,
but they can all relate to heart wounds. So
right,
going from this teenage girl, this picture that just really hits me in the stomach of this teenage girl looking in the mirror. I hate you. I hate you. I hate
yeah,
you. And all of the wounds of high school and just arriving in the military with zero self-worth, really hating yourself, but
Right.
then finding identity and value, but in the Marine Corps and in your
Right.
accomplishments in the eyes of others in the Marine Corps, and then to have that hit.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
Like as long as I do a good job, they'll love me. That was always my thing. The best revenge is success. And those messages. And then when that happened and my career was threatened like that, um, I just felt very rejected
Yeah.
and very uncared for. And even in my relationship, the father of my child, there was a lot of issues there. And at that point, he walked away. So I was completely alone. Again, abandoned, alone, rejected. It was just very, very hard. And then all of a sudden, this idea came up. I don't even know. It was probably my company level leadership, because my company level leadership, my captain and first sergeant fought for me. They really, really fought for me. They cared for me a lot. And so they were like, hey, let's just extend. Why don't you just extend 6 months? And then they have nothing to complain about, because that's about how much time would be taken away from their, you know, from what they wanted from me. So, hey, I ended up extending my contract there as a drill instructor for 6 months so that I could have my baby and then make up the time afterwards. That was the plan. And so I was very grateful that somebody even brought that idea up. So there was my solution. So I ended up staying on the drill field longer. No big deal. So I go ahead and I have my baby. I'm completely alone throughout my entire pregnancy. It was literally the saddest time of my life, because I really did love my son's father a lot. And
Wow.
it was just so lonely. I've never been so lonely, but it was also so beautiful too, because there was this human inside of me, and I'm like, how do I love you so much? How do I love you so much, even though I'm so sad?
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's just such a crazy time. So I ended up having Connor, and he was a big, healthy baby. He was 9 pounds and 12 ounces. And
Man.
I stayed in shape the entire time I was pregnant. I was running, and I did not gain a lot of weight. People would say, oh, you're going to have a, a preemie. Like, I don't feel like it's a preemie. It's my first baby, but
No,
it does not feel
cannonball.
like a preemie. But anyway, so Connor ended up being big, beautiful, healthy, and just a joy. He was just a joy. But at the same time, I still had a lot of time left as a drill instructor, working 120 plus hours a week. As a senior drill instructor, you're working longer hours than your drill instructors. And I had a daycare problem, because daycare is only open from such and such time to such and such time. And during my duty nights, I was expected to stay there at the squad bay with the recruits.
Mm.
So my new company commander, get this, my new company commander, who took place of my other company commander, she says, well, my mom babysits. She'll babysit your child. And I'm like, why would she do that? And she's like, I don't know. My mom just loves the Lord, and she just loves to help. And I'm like, are you kidding me, Lord? So she ends up babysitting. She's basically raising my infant son while I'm finishing out the remainder of my time as a drill instructor. So I go back to work. Connor, like it's probably been about maybe 6 weeks since I'd had Connor, and I was expected to go right back to work, climbing ropes, jumping over walls, running with the recruits, and doing all the things, right? So I went right back into it. And that was a whole bunch of grace of God too, because that's not even normal. So I was able to do it. And those recruits, that last cycle of recruits that I completed as a senior drill instructor, we came up with, there were so many problems, and they investigated one of my drill instructors because of recruit allegations. There were a bunch of problems, but at the same time, we did so good. We won all 5 trophies. We just mopped the floor. It was amazing. I had amazing drill instructors. And it's just not very often that you get to have like your dream team, but I had my dream team. And unfortunately, I did one of my drill instructors ended up, her career basically got taken away from her because of some lies that some recruits told. It was very unfortunate. It was so sad. But even through all that, there was victory. Those recruits, they could run, they could shoot, they could swim, they could do all the things. They were smart, they were intense, they were crisp, and I got my dream platoon. Those girls were the bomb. And even though it was really, really hard for all of us, I mean, that was a victorious moment after everything I'd been through. And I remember toward the end of that training cycle, the 3-month training cycle, we were getting ready to do our final physical fitness test as a platoon. And I came out there, and this is after running my recruits in the dirt and just making them sweat and making them throw up and just crushing them, right? I was just
fun.
crushing them. And they were just like, oh, and it was just great. I loved it because my main thing was I loved to run. I was a runner. And so right before the final PFT, I bring my son, my infant son out, and I put a blanket down on the squad bay. And my recruits are looking at me like, what is going on? Because I'm holding this baby. And I put Connor down on the squad bay on the blanket, and he's kind of doing tummy time. And the recruits are so confused. So I call them all around my baby. Come here and look at my baby. The first time, they didn't know I was a mom. They had no idea. They're all like, there is no way this lady could be a mom. But I call them around to, I'm like, behold, my baby. And they're like, okay. They were very confused. And I'm like, do you know why I brought you my baby to see? And they're like, no, ma'am. And I'm like, well, I want you to do really good on this PFT. And remember that I'm going to be running ahead of all of you. I'm going to be running in front of all of you because that's all I do is just smoke check you all day long. And I just want you to know that the woman that's running ahead of you just gave birth. So the recruits are like, wow, they're just like all fired up and everything like that. And it was just a really good moment, a really good bonding moment with my recruits. And I, it's like they could see, hey, you can have a baby and you can still, be an effective, good Marine and a good leader. And, and hopefully gave them the message that to take the stigma off having babies. And
yeah,
I just always like to encourage people to see that getting pregnant is not the worst thing in the world. And maybe they can take that message, maybe they could take that message into their own lives and, before they make a decision that they regret later on. And so that was just a really good redeeming moment that God brought into my life. And though it was hard,
I don't want to rush past that. I think
yeah.
that could be a really important reason why, out of your whole story, like we talked beforehand about what you're going to share, and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to fit all this in.
Yeah.
But you prayed that you would be directed to share the pertinent parts.
Yes.
And I'm looking to paint a picture of like how your heart has been wounded, because I want to tell the story of how it got healed. And you tell the story of a baby. It's not a very wounding sort of a story. And then it just dawns on me, there could be somebody watching or listening to this podcast who needs to hear that message of babies are a blessing from the Lord. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you can be in a situation where you realize, nobody wants this baby to happen. And it's super inconvenient. And there is an exit door, a bright red exit sign that I could walk through. And you've got this story of not just getting through it, but a story of victory around making that choice. And I just wanted to draw a little picture around that and slow down for anybody who's in that same situation. What a beautiful thing to share. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it also gives compassion. I have so much compassion for a woman that felt so desperate that she felt that she had to make that choice.
Yeah.
But I also want those women that made the other choice, I want them to also understand that there's redemption for that. There's healing for that too.
Yeah, that's very true.
Like Jesus heals these things. He forgives these things. And but anyways, yeah, thank you so much for pointing that out. I had no idea I was going to talk about
Well,
that.
I think there's a guide to this conversation who knows better than we do. But
I think you're right. Yeah.
continuing the story of how you got to a point, at some point, I don't yet know where this hits your story, but where you realize you've got some serious wounds and you end up taking a pretty dramatic step to receive some
Well,
healing.
to kind of fast forward through the rest of my career, there was a point when I did marry my son's father, but it fell apart right away. So again, another wound.
Yeah.
And it wasn't good. And then we ended up getting divorced around 2007. So I spent from 2007 all the way up until I retired from the Marine Corps in 2015 being very, very single and very broken about it.
Mm.
And for the first time in my life, I was really abusing alcohol on the regular. And and there were medications that I started taking. There was just a lot of things. On the outside, I was very put together. And I got promoted to first sergeant. I retired as a first sergeant. So on the outside, everything was going great. But on the inside, things were just piling up in turmoil and about to just bust loose. But I did decide to go ahead and retire at the 20-year mark because I felt like I don't know if I can endure this much longer and hold it all together, especially for the sake of my son, who is now like entering into preteen years. So
Yeah.
I decided to retire. And I retired in North Carolina again in 2015. And I decided that it was time to make a big change and get rid of my big fancy house because I was taking a huge pay cut. So I put out some feelers out on Facebook and I was asking my friends, hey, y'all have any suggestions on a good place to settle down that's, lower cost of living and, low crime, mountains preferably, and a couple people said a couple things. So I kind of narrowed it down between Montana and Pennsylvania. I don't know. I'd never even been to Pennsylvania, but I was like, Pennsylvania seems just really green and I really like green. And so one of my buddies, retired sergeant major, he he lets me know, hey, you should come visit me and my family and see how you like Emporium, Pennsylvania, where I currently live, right? So I go and I take a trip and I see my friend Todd, and he shows me around the place. I see all the mountains, and of course, he shows this place to me in fall. So I'm in love with fall colors. I'm in love with all the hardwood trees and everything. And I see one house, and it's a big old kind of shabby looking Victorian house that was built in 1906. And I'm like, that's the house. I looked at it for 20 minutes, looked at the foundation, looked at the bones, and I'm like, this is the house. So I bought this house. And this is around 2016 because I had struggled for about a year to try to make the big fat mortgage that I had in North Carolina, and it was just not working. I was about to literally become a starving artist. So I moved here, and a year later, I moved my son here. I wanted him to spend high school in one spot for 4 years because he never had the chance to do that before. So he was living with his dad when I first moved in here. This is going somewhere, I promise you. So I don't know anyone in this town in Emporium except for my retired sergeant major buddy. And I didn't know what to do. So I was like, in the absence of knowing what to do, I think I'm just going to paint my house, the outside of my house. It's 3 stories. I don't know how to paint a house, but but it's like in the absence of knowing what to do, I got to do something. So I took it to task, and everybody in town thought I was crazy. So I'm hanging off scaffolding, painting my house, scraping the paint, and it's all wood, the original wood. I'm filling every single crack with caulking with my one finger, and I'm just slowly going through the whole outside of the house. And I did end up painting the whole house by myself. Learned how to put up scaffolding by myself, 3 stories of scaffolding. I had to YouTube that. I had to YouTube a lot of things because I did not know what I was doing. I almost fell several times, but it was an adventure. In the process of restoring this house, I can look back now and see the foreshadowing of how Jesus was about to restore my heart, okay? Because I was actually spending a lot of time with God when I was up on that scaffolding for the first time ever. And so fast forward, it's 2018. My buddy Todd, he kills himself out of nowhere. He's a motivational speaker. He's doing charities for cancer victims in the area. Just out of the blue, kills himself. And I was devastated. And remember in the last podcast, I told you about the funeral and how I had invited other Marine buddies and stuff to come stay with me because I had extra rooms and extra beds. So all 3 of those, 2 of the people that came to stay with me, well, one of them had already gone through an ORW drop zone. His name was Troy. I saw a big change in Troy during the whole funeral time frame because it was over the course of a weekend that we were spending time together. And I knew there was something different about Troy. I asked him, "What's different about you? You used to be horrible."
You were my friend, and you were horrible.
And I'm like, I really like you now. We were friends, but I also knew he was a heathen, I mean, we kind of all were, if I'm being honest. But he was like very troubled, and he had a lot of trauma from losing a lot of Marines in combat and those kinds of things. And he told me about ORW. And I was like, wow, okay. I was like, I want to know Jesus like you do. He's like, don't worry, you'll get to go to a drop zone. It was the first female drop zone. I was like, yeah, right. I'm not going to go. That's dumb. I don't have anything to do with ministry. But I ended up going about a year later. And the other person that was here during the funeral time frame, other than Troy, was retired Sergeant Major Mike Daley.
Oh, wow.
During the funeral. This is 2018. I hadn't seen Mike Daley since we were drill instructors back at Parris Island in the 1900s.
Wow.
I like to say the 1900s. So me and Troy and Mike, we're all here to be there for Todd, to say goodbye to Todd. And it was just a very tragic and sad time. But none of us had seen each other for a really long time. We were all drill instructors together at the same time. Now we're all together again. All 3 of us are together again for Todd's funeral. Very sad time. But it was also kind of a wonderful time too. It's hard to explain.
Yeah,
I'm sure you get it. I'm sure you get it. But then Mike ends up going to a drop zone too because of Troy. So Mike goes to a drop zone. I don't know anything about this. And then I go to a drop zone in like 2019. I don't really know anything about Mike. And then I eventually find out that Mike has gone through a drop zone too. And a little bit of time goes by. And then, Mike and I end up becoming friends. So Mike Daley and I are friends where me, Troy, and Mike are all on like this Marco Polo thing where we send videos back and forth to each other. And we're all talking about God and what God is doing in our lives. We've all gone through drop zones by this point.
Wow,
we've all had all 3 of us. And we've all had horrible things, happen to us in our lives. We've all had restoration things happen to us. We've all experienced Jesus at this point in an incredible way. And so, again, Mike and I are friends. And then over time, like 2021 rolls around, my son goes to boot camp at Parris Island to become a Marine. And I'm like, man, I need some buddies to go with me to this graduation. I can't just go show up and hang out with my ex-husband's whole family. I mean, I love them. That's all been redeemed. We're all good friends now. I do love them. But at the same time, I kind of wanted to have my little posse there. And so I asked Troy and if he and his wife and Mike would all come and we could all go on a road trip together. And we're all just friends at this time. Well, Troy ends up having to back out of it. Yeah, back out of it. I think he was like doing the little Cupid thing the whole time because we're both single at that time. And so Mike goes, well, I'll still go. So Mike and I head to Paris Island to see my son graduate boot camp. And while we're there, Mike says, Sarah, I just want you to know I'm pursuing you. And I'm like thinking in my head, it's about
Direct.
time. I'm like, it's about time.
That's awesome.
The man doesn't even know how to flirt. We were only friends. And then we were literally married about 3 weeks later. We didn't even date. I'm like,
That's
well,
amazing.
You live in Florida. I live in Pennsylvania. This has got to get fixed, but you're not just going to come shack up with me. We ain't going to have any of that. So we did it the godly way.
Mm-hmm.
We just took away the temptation altogether, and we just decided to just get married.
Okay, so the last time that you were with us, so your husband has been on one of our R3 podcasts, has kind of told his story of his life, his wounding, his restoration, him finding purpose. You talked a little bit more about kind of the wounds that you wrestled with in our last episode as well, and how even after the drop zone, all of these mental health issues one at a time healed, medications going away. I want to talk more about the drop zone, but I think I'm not going to. I think in the time that we've got left, don't have a ton of time left. I think I just want to pick up right where you left off. I mean, anyone who's been following the R3 podcast knows the story. Wounding, leading to tragic behavior, leading to more wounding. And that's just the life story for a lot of people. But what happens, not just when you receive that healing in a drop zone, but when part of your healing story is receiving union with somebody else who's received the same healing. I'm just interested, just talk about what it is like, not just for two people who have been through a drop zone and who know Jesus, but like who teach others these things, who as a ministry go and restore others. How does that play out in the marriage? There's a big open question.
Oh man, it's so good. When you can enter into a marriage with a restored heart, you bring your most authentic self into the marriage. I had a lot of masks I was holding up prior to Jesus restoring my heart and taking away all of the poses, taking away all the masks. And I've never been more honest with another human than my husband. And he has that same feeling. We both brought restored hearts into one marriage. And I'd love to say that marriage is hard, but it's just not. I don't know. I've always thought, oh, marriage and relationships, they're just so hard,
Because they had been for you.
And I feel very compassionate for people that are going through that, but I'm not experiencing that. And we've been married for 3.5 years now. And, the meanest thing he's ever said to me is, you shouldn't talk to me that way. That was like the biggest fight we've ever had, And I'm like,
and these are two Marine drill instructors married. You could paint an ugly picture, but that's just not happening.
Yeah, there's no butting heads. Like, we're suited for each other so perfectly. He has spiritual giftings that I don't have. I have spiritual giftings that he doesn't have. We're growing together in our love for Jesus. We pray together. If there's a problem or some kind of spiritual warfare that we're facing, we take it to the Lord. If I start to get irritated with him, I tell on him to God and he works it out. But that's I just can't say that happens a lot. I would be lying if I said that happens all the time, because it just really doesn't. And I bet Mike tells on me a lot to God. Because like I said, he's the most patient man in the world. He gives me so much grace. He's so patient with me. I don't know. It's like we were made for each other. I can't even explain it. And in ministry, the men's portion of ORW, that ministry is separate from women. So what what goes on in his drop zone pretty much stays at his drop zone, but he comes back with, a vague story of redemption. He doesn't come and tell me all the ins and outs of what the men were facing there, but he comes back and his face is just glowing and he's like, hearts were restored. Jesus did what he does. That's just what he does. And it's been a while since I've facilitated at a drop zone. It's very hard to find enough, women veterans and first responders to have enough time to come facilitate for these things. So it's been quite a while, and I'm currently the only women veteran, that facilitates on the team. So it's been a while, and I'm just looking forward to seeing what ORW does next, because I know that they have a heart for women.
Yeah, I think we're going to have some news on that in just the next few months.
Yeah, and I would never speak for them or anything like that, but I'm just sitting here waiting and willing and excited for whenever, that call comes along and I get to help out again.
Man.
I'd love to do it. Yeah. It's healing every time I go to facilitate these women. It's even like I get healed a little bit more each time.
Yeah.
In some different area. We're always expanding as followers of Jesus, and our minds are constantly being conformed to the image of Christ. So it's just very exciting. If anyone says that following Jesus is boring, they haven't met Jesus.
Yeah.
And it's just a wild ride. But yeah.
I think that's beautiful. That's a beautiful way to close. Like, looking at your story, it's an incredible story. But the fact that after all of these adventures, some of them good, most of them painful, you have come to a place where you're at the most adventurous season of your life.
Yeah.
And it's also the season of the greatest peace, the greatest harmony in relationships, the greatest joy, the greatest sense of secure identity of yourself. The woman that's been talking to me for the past hour, it's almost impossible to imagine being the teenage girl standing in front of the mirror. And that's because you know who you are and you know whose you are. It's amazing.
Yeah, the Lord, our Lord Jesus, he is a restorer, and he takes your ashes and turns them to beauty. He gives you beauty for ashes every single time. All you got to do is ask him. And that has been my story. He's taken tragedy, like the tragedy of the loss of our friend. He took something horrible and he turned it into a marriage.
Yeah.
How do you do this, Lord? You can't make this stuff up. This is not a coincidence. And the fact that before I got married, I just finally said, you know what, Jesus, if you don't want me to be married and you don't want me to have a man, that's okay. I just want to follow you. Just take the desire away from me, please. Well, he never took the desire away from me. He just gave me a husband. Like within like 4 months of turning it over to him and saying, I relinquish this desire to you, Lord. You have your way. You do your thing. I'm not going to get in the way anymore. I'm not going to try to fix my destiny anymore. I give it to you. And then, it wasn't long after I said that to him that he gave me the most amazing husband. I didn't even know I needed a man like Mike. But I'm sorry.
No, this is perfect. This is so perfect. I wish we could just push a button and go, and we're back with hour 2.
I know, right?
and I have a feeling that we will be back together, Sarah.
I hope
pretty soon. If you've been listening to this story and you see in this some similarities with your story, just that you've had rough times, that you've not felt great about yourself, that you've made mistakes and can consider, I've really wounded myself. You can look at other people and go, that person just crushed me. And you're struggling with the effects of that. Sarah has a beautiful story, but it's not a story. It's the truth, because she engaged with Jesus, who is available to you, and a process that is available to you as well. And that's the drop zone. So if you would, check out this website up here, www.operationrestoredwarrior.org. You can go there, like right now. You can sign up for a drop zone. You can come to one of our Drop Zone events. You can even, within 5 minutes from now, be going through a Drop Zone online. So please, just go check it out. I mean, if there's even a chance that your story could look more like Sarah's story, why would you not? Because I love her story. And that's it. Sarah, thank you so much for being with us, and we will see you again.
Thank you, Shane. God bless.
Yeah, and thank you all for watching. We will see you on the next R3 podcast.